Shalom and welcome to the latest edition of Jerusalem Studio. Last Sunday, Israel has successfully preempted and deflected an attack plan hatched by the Lebanese Iranian-proxy Hezbollah. The risk of immediate escalation into a full-scale regional war has receded for the moment as the Iranian masters of this Lebanese Shi'ites in Lebanon would rather wait for better circumstances from their perspective. Nevertheless, Israel cannot let down its guard as other Iranian proxies from Syria and Iraq all the way south to Yemen are plotting their own attacks. So what are the dangers ahead for Israel as it is still involved in Gaza and Lebanon? Joining us to dissect these questions is retired Colonel Dr. Eran Lerman, currently the Vice President of Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, formerly the Deputy National Security Advisor. It's good to see you, Eran. And Deputy, of course, to the former National Security Advisor and Mossad Division Chief, Dr. Arad. It's good to have you with us as well.
Right. Good to be here.
It's a pleasure indeed. And with us, of course, our TV7 Editor-at-Large, Mr. Amir. Oren, Amir, set the stage for us.
With little more than 2 months until the American elections, we seem to be cruising towards November the 5th, of course, unless there are either an October surprise or even an earlier September surprise. What has happened in the war between Israel and Iran, which was undeclared but has been going on for several years, is that over the last several weeks and months, there were unexpected events in unexpected places. For instance, Israel took out a Hamas leader, Aruri, in Beirut, and an Iranian official in Damascus, and then a Hamas official, Hania, in Tehran. Iran, for its part, has been using its various proxies against Israel, except for the mid-April offensive, which was direct and declared. So as we look towards the next couple of months, we must expect the unexpected again, attacks by the Houthis, not only from Yemen. They have already announced that they will attack Israel from the west, from the Mediterranean, North Africa, or on the high seas. And there are militias in Iraq and in Syria. And in addition to that, we must keep watching the Iranian nuclear project.
One anecdote to date, at least from public information, the Iranians have yet to identify the method in which the leader of Hamas, of the Politburo, Ismail Hania, was targeted in their secure compound. They continue to speculate. Their extensive efforts to identify the various method of operandi have yet to be completely understood.
But they rule out suicide.
The only reason that they have attached it to Israel, even though Israel has to date also not claimed responsibility for the strike, other than, of course, reporters assessing that this is the most likely to be the case, this is for the Iranians the only legal basis that ultimately would grant them a green light to target Israel, and therefore they cling to this assessment. Nevertheless, they have no proof, and therefore any attack that they may pursue against Israel, irrespective of the fact that they joined the war on the 8th of October by greenlighting their proxies to attack Israel, has yet to bear any sense of judicial legitimacy. But Dr. Lerman, I'd like to ask you, since the words that are attached to one another and are most forthcoming right now in Washington is both independence and action, be it for the Ukrainians in their offensive against Kurds, the activities that are attributed to Israel, be they in Tehran or elsewhere, and the recommendation ultimately is to become more emboldened in the current political climate in Washington due to the fact that President Joe Biden is seemingly less eager to find some sort of friction with allies and partners so close to that election point. Is that something that Israel should take into the equation, or is this something that may be too overly interpreted?
I think we should bear in mind that Israel is now operating within a matrix which is very different from anything we've experienced in our history, really. True, most of the work done in April, the night of 14 April, was done by the Israeli technological capabilities, Air Force and so on, missile defense, but a significant part was done by the Americans and Western allies, as well as by Arab partners. This is a new matrix. The same is true for the deterrent posture erected in the face of Iran following the Haniyeh assassination, the death of Ismail Haniyeh, with a very formidable American presence, and indications that others are also involved. Meanwhile, the international coalition is slowly and with limited effect degrading Houthi capabilities. We are not alone, which has implications for independence of action, but also clearly has played a role in deterring Iran. I wouldn't, go too far in terms of, Pezeshkian being a new decision maker in Tehran. Presidents of Iran make very limited decisions, mostly about the local economy. The sovereign questions of policy, ideology, international affairs, military issues are in the hands of the leader. However, the fact, and we know how Iranian elections are cooked, the fact that these elections went to someone who comes from the line of reformists, but basically those like him and Arakchi and others who are committed to trying to alleviate the level of tension with the West, indicates a level of probably of worry in Tehran, which was reflected also in the decision not to avenge the death of Haniyeh against Israel. As of yet, true enough, but this has by now been going on for weeks on end. It indicates that the powers that be in Tehran perceive a problem, and that problem will become much more acute once if the IAEA determines that Iran is in serious breach of its commitments. Put all of this together, and they have reasons to try and avoid an all-out confrontation that would involve the Americans. You don't go to war with America with your eyes open.
Absolutely. Well, similar to the Houthis in Yemen or Ansar Allah, which is, of course, dominated by the Houthi tribe, the RGC in Iran is heavily embedded in its own economy, and therefore, when the economy is in bad shape, it also sustains hard consequences of...
And let's remember that Chag is every bit as vulnerable as Hodeidah, and not further in terms of Israeli Air Force capabilities. The one difference is that it would require all flight over Saudi territory, and the Iranians are trying to threaten the Saudis against such a scenario. It gives you a sense of just,
for that matter.
It gives you a sense of just how worried they are.
Indeed. Dr. Arad, I'd like to raise a statement that was made by a colleague and a friend, Dr. Rafael Barrahi, who a couple of days ago on one of our programs has highlighted that now is a strategic window of opportunity for the State of Israel when it comes to confronting the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, naturally, that may be true, but within the political climate, it seems to be highly unlikely that Israel would receive some sort of green light from the Americans unless the Iranians conduct some sort of direct or indirect attack against the State of Israel that would bring about some sort of devastating consequence. Do you see a reality in which Israel could outmaneuver those limitations in order to confront the Iranian threat, to contend with very real dangers, including a regime that is openly, if not publicly, but still openly driven to ratchet up its nuclear capacity?
Well, first, let's talk about the legitimacy of such an act, which would fall under the notion of a precautionary, preemptive attack, namely realizing that Iran has declared its intention to bring about Israel's demise, realizing that it already took direct action. Certainly, we are entitled, it would be legitimate for us to act preemptively, to use that moment of advantage, presumably, or opportunity, and to strike. So a legitimacy may exist. But the question is whether we have such capability, and to the extent that we do have, what would be the consequences? If it could solve the problem once and for all, and it would end all threats, then maybe. And here, I don't have the details of the various options, but one must assume that it would not be a decisive blow to such an effect that it would cancel all future possibilities of Iran recovering or getting aid and being given supply from elsewhere, only to find ourselves with an Iran that now has all legitimacy to acquire such weapons for defensive purposes on its part, and then we would be confronted with a much more difficult situation. So it is the consequences that matter, and they depend on the capabilities to mount such an attack. Nothing would be more disastrous than a failed attack, because it would have some of the worst consequences in the aftermath without having any benefits. Incidentally, the measures that were referred to by Eran before about the vulnerability of the oil facilities in Iran, one could make an equation of saying that would respond in kind in terms of the extent of damage that is inflicted on us. And since it is the Hezbollah who presumably directly are the ones who are can cripple Israeli infrastructures, then we could say infrastructures for infrastructures. And the vulnerability of the Iranian oil and gas infrastructures is so much more, then we can have this as a tit-for-tat kind of equation to do. Now, if it is, if the Iranians say that they are up to destroy Israel and support other countries that call about the destruction of Israel, then the answer should be what Shimon Peres, that recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, once said when asked, what do you have to say about Iranian threats to destroy Israel? His answer, which was almost intuitive, instinctive, he said, but Iran can be destroyed too. Now, that is what they should come to understand. And the earlier that realization would occur, the better it would be. I don't know to what extent this is well framed in their minds. So I would not rush into a preemptive strike. There may be advantages. But look what we are saying. Many of our, say, generals and pundits are saying, let's restrain ourselves, let's not attack the Hezbollah, let's gather forces, and then we'll mount a decisive attack on Hezbollah, and then we'll mount a regime change in Iran, and then we'll mount a decisive victory on Iran. Now, if you claim that, you give every reason to Iran to defend itself. Now it would be really threatened, and it would only accelerate the process that you want to prevent. So we should be very cautious about the threats either to declare eternal enmity to Iran and a commitment to do away with both Hezbollah and possibly Iran. Restraint in this case and prudence would be better.
Mr. Oren, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is well in his 80s, an elderly man, not the healthiest of people out there, very vocal, both inside his chambers, in the hallways, as well as publicly, to his hatred of the state of Israel and the necessity to destroy it. An ideology obviously rooted in 12er Shiite Islam, but nonetheless also in a strategic perception that the only true danger to the Ayatollah regime is that of the United States, and as the extension of the United States in the region, Israel should not be there, as he put it mildly. Is his elderly years, with the we could at least expect that his son would be the number one candidate to replace him, now that Ibrahim Raisi, the former president, is so conveniently out of the picture for the current supreme leader. Is this also within the calculus when we're dealing with the Iranians and the threats made? Ultimately, they are immediate threats, but in the medium to long term.
So it's the topic of regime stability, regime change. Now, the Soviet-American rivalry of the Cold War is not the perfect analogy for what is happening between Israel and Iran. But nevertheless, at least in the abstract, one can point to the debate which went on earlier in the Truman administration, but mostly in the Eisenhower administration, starting with the Korean War, but after that, in the 8 years of the Eisenhower presidency. Having stabilized Western Europe earlier under the Marshall Plan, Point 4 and all of that, the question was containment or rollback. Should the West, led by the United States, see as a sufficient goal and allocate sufficient means only to contain the Soviet Union, let it stand where it stood, the Warsaw Pact, Central Eastern Europe, and no more? Or should they mount a campaign to roll back Soviet Russia, the Chinese communist regime, and all of that? The end result was détente in the 1970s, and then on when the Soviet system failed. Can Israel wait for the Iranian Islamic Republic to fail out of its own problems, an implosion? Should Israel trigger an explosion? Perhaps we can at least delay the decisions as far as Israel is able to until next year.
Of course, so long as they do not break out to the capacity of attaining nuclear weapon capability, and then we are in a whole new equation altogether.
Yes, but also in conversations with former colleagues of both Iran and Uzi, the question came up, is there any way to have a secret channel with Iran, at least to diffuse the crisis? Because what they want is an assurance that neither Israel nor the United States will help their opposition to try and topple the regime. Up to now, what one hears is that there is no chance of their responding.
I highly doubt that would be...
I think that the Americans, under previous administrations, did give such an assurance.
In exchange for
Obama
what?
Obama did on day one.
Exactly.
That's it. He said,
Of
not in the business
not
of
changing the regime.
Of regime
Then it changed, but they could still want this. The question is about the nuclear option. On what basis can one find a middle ground?
But you know, you've talked about the newly installed Iranian president. When the FBI in 2016 looked into Hillary Clinton's unclassified email account, and then they published it. It is for everyone to see. There were emails within the Obama administration between players who are still with us, Jake Sullivan, Bill Burns, and the question, and even outside advice by people like Graham Allison. And their question was, can the secret talks in Oman succeed before Ahmadinejad's term is over? So we are still grappling with the same problems. Supposedly relatively moderate president. How much influence does he have over the IRGC and the supreme leader? It's never going to stop until perhaps after Khamenei.
Well, we don't have very much time left, and therefore I do like to also touch base on Iran's strategic ploy, be it's the one devised by Qasem Soleimani under the Quds Force of the IRGC, during the course of which he placed in very strategic positions various proxies. One of those proxies, naturally, we referred to earlier, Ansar Allah, which has dominated much of western Yemen by the Houthi tribe in various alliances with a composition of Sunni tribes that have somehow got into the same tent with this Shiite tribe. We're seeing now this alliance expand also into the eastern shores of Africa, including in Somalia, including in Sudan. And therefore, when we're looking at this expansion of the Iranians into the eastern side of this Red Sea and within this context also threatening now, once again, maritime shipping not only from Yemen, is there something that Israel should exploit in the event that Ansar Allah would follow through on its threat to attack Israel?
Well, as you know, Sudan was part of the Iranian game until around 2012. I remember a situation where an ambassador, when I was still at the National Security Staff, and an ambassador of a European country who previously served in Khartoum came to me and said, the day before there's been an attack, a major attack on an arms depot in Sudan. Can you say anything about it? I said, well, of course, I can tell you nothing. But if the Sudanese think we did it, there must be a construct in their mind as to what are they doing that would induce us to attack in Sudan. And therefore, they should cease and desist what they're doing that gives them reason to think that we may have had an interest. The interesting thing is, this is what happened. The Sudanese realized that the cost of working with the Iranians is spiraling, whereas the Saudis are willing to offer them, make them a decent counteroffer. Sudan today is not a country. It's a landscape of warring factions. None of them, very, let's say, deeply committed to human rights. Some less than others. The Emiratis are deeply involved. The Egyptians are deeply involved. Israel's capacity to influence the outcome in Sudan is very limited. But since we have a relationship with the Emiratis, for example, that share our interests in preventing Iran from taking over, we should be at least coordinating very closely with our regional partners.
Particularly the Egyptians.
And the problem is that the Egyptians and the Emiratis are not necessarily on the same side in this game, which complicates our life.
In Libya, too.
In Libya they are on the same side. It's bizarre. In Libya, they are on the same side, on Haftar's side, and the Turks are on the other side.
And the Russians.
And now the Turks are playing a new game with Sisi to see if they can reconfigure.
All the while in Somalia, they're now once again on opposing sides. So it's quite complicated. But
indeed, it is.
Nonetheless, when we're seeing, it's been already over a year since the Rapid Deployment Forces have challenged Abdel Fattah al-Burhan in Sudan, and we're seeing how this composition of Abdel Fattah al-Sisi backing Abdel Fattah al-Burhan at the time when they urged Israel to support them in this challenge, so to speak, or attempted coup, and then with a blink of an eye, suddenly we see the Iranians reinsert themselves into this composition, and now we're also seeing those unmanned aerial vehicles posing a significant balance shift within that civil war that may yet grant the Iranians the upper hand. And therefore, Dr. Arad, in the little time that we have left, how should Israel conduct itself? And is this being done, if it is, or should be done in concert with the Americans?
Well, you see, when we look at all those complexities that you just elaborated among all those feuding sides at each place, and then it looks as if the game of multilateral diplomacy in action is losing favor. I would like to fall back on good old unilateralism, which does not involve these kind of complications. But that, of course, is impossible. So we have to maneuver, obviously. It is very complicated, and I think on every specific issue, we have to make the necessary calculation. Somebody had said, a good European observer of the Middle East said we would have to play a minuet, a constant minuet of dancing and changing partners and everything, being very, very flexible, and always bearing in mind the hierarchy of certain interest in a certain region when you have very strange bedfellows all over.
Mr. Owen, closing statement.
The Iranians learned a bitter lesson about regime change when Donald Trump was elected, rather than Hillary Clinton as the successor to Barack Obama. And then a year and a half later, the JCPOA was no longer in force, and therefore they had rather wait until November and see who is going to be at the White House come January 2025. They will not make any major decision.
Who's
before
that?
The Iranians.
And
What
us.
makes we've been surprised before.
Yes.
So if only for the sake of
Yeah,
covering,
let's add the word maybe or perhaps.
Yeah. But is there no way in which they could do one step of taking a step that would advance their position
They
on
could.
the nuclear issue? There are quite a number, a kind of fait accompli just before anything happens.
And with those dramatic remarks, this is all the time that we have for today. So I'd like to thank Dr. Arad, Dr. Lerman, and Mr. Oren for all of your insights, and to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.